Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here, back with another speed painting guide. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to quickly paint the Sylvaneth warriors of Yltharis Guardians from Warhammer Underworlds, and as always I'll be using the Citadel range of paints to do so. The intention of this tutorial is to get your miniatures painted up to a respectable gaming standard in as little time as possible, using as fewer paints as possible. Because, after all, playing with painted miniatures of any standard is better than boring bare plastic. So, some key things to note before we start. Paint all of your miniatures at the same time, applying each colour to each model before moving on to the next paint. And remember to keep the steps quick and not worry too much about little mistakes or getting things perfect. Now, before we can start to paint, you will first need to prime your miniatures so that later layers of paint adhere to the plastic better. This also gives us the opportunity to start painting by opting to use a black primer. This black starting colour will serve as what I call the shadow layer. This is a dark layer of paint that will only be visible in the recessed areas once we've painted over it and will create the effect of shadows. This not only improves realism but also helps to boost the contrast, making those details stand out. You may have noticed that I've kept the miniatures separate from their bases for ease of painting. Therefore, in order to hold them, I've superglued a length of small wire into a hole drilled in the tab using a pin vise. Drybrushing is a technique that we'll be using quite a bit in this tutorial, so let's cover how it's done. To begin, you'll want to load up a fairly large brush with some paint before removing the excess onto a tissue or a piece of paper, so that only a small amount of paint remains in the bristles. One thing I like to do while drybrushing is to keep my brush ever so slightly damp, as it helps to avoid that dusty texture that can often form. Even though this technique is called drybrushing, having a small amount of moisture in your bristles will give you better results. The first paint we'll be using to drybrush is Dryad Bark. This warm dark brown is perfect for the bark of the Revenant's bodies, so we'll be focusing this drybrush over these areas, leaving the more human-like aspects, like the torsos and heads, alone for now. The paint will start to accumulate onto the slightly more raised areas, leaving only the black visible in the recesses. This will allow us to avoid having to use washes to bring out these shadows later on, which not only means we don't have to spend time applying the wash, but we can also avoid waiting for it to dry thoroughly before progressing. As you can see, this is a very quick and easy step to perform. Using the same drybrushing technique as before, we next want to apply some Gothel Brown over the areas that we tackled with Dryad Bark. This time, however, we want to apply a little less pressure with the brush. This will ensure that the paint only accumulates on the raised, hard edges, creating a quick highlight of the lighter Gothel Brown. With the brown completed, we next want to add some green to the model. These areas will be tackled using the same heavy drybrushing technique that we applied the Dryad Bark with. However, this time we'll only want to focus on the smaller branches and vines on our Sylvaneth. The green I've chosen for this step is Loren Forest. It's the perfect earthy green for those forest dwellers and will allow us to make a nice transition from the browns to the greens. Using some lighter Straken Green, apply a light dry brush over the tips of the branches and vines to create a quick edge highlight that will help those details to stand out. Next, we can tackle the more human-like aspects of our Sylvaneth, as well as their forest familiars. We want to create a spirit-like appearance to these areas, so we need a light base coat of Celestra Grey to get us going. Before we apply the paint to the model, first mix in water in small amounts until your consistency is similar to what you see here. We want the paint to be thin enough to apply a couple of layers that will give us a good smooth coverage. Apply your thin paint over the torso, hair, heads, weapons, arms and critters, taking care not to overspill onto the green and brown areas that we've already painted. Don't worry if you do, as this can always be touched up later on. Now that we have our light base colour, we can begin to create that ethereal effect by applying a layer of Nihilakh Oxide over the Celestra Grey. You can apply this straight from the pot and treat it much like you would a wash, however, I prefer a slightly more subtle blue. Therefore, I've mixed in just a little Lamia medium. You could use water as an alternative. When applied over the light colour, the oxide will flow into the recesses, leaving the raised areas as a lighter base colour with just a hint of blue. Perfect for that spirit-like appearance. The final step is to pick out the flowers on Galangan's branches, and for this use some Screamer Pink thinned in the same way as the Celestra Grey was. And here we have the assembled and based warband. I painted the forest bases to much the same way as the rest of the models, with the addition of some Mechanica Standard Grey drybrushing over the rocks. As it stands, the warband has a nice and simple paint job that is perfect for your tabletop standard. This scheme took me around 2 hours to complete, not including the basing and assembly, which took me a further 30 minutes to do so. However, if you do have a little more free time, there are a few more improvements that you can make. The first involves using the glaze Waywatcher Green to target directly into some of the recesses of the blue areas using a small brush. This not only helps to boost some of the definition in these areas, but also adds to that ghostly greenish blue glow. You can also use a little Cassandora Yellow to pick out the small crystal embedded into the stomach of some of your Sylvaneth. For a brighter yellow, paint over the crystal with some Celestra Grey before applying the wash. And here we have Yltharis Guardians once again, this time with a few minor improvements. Whilst I focused on the Warhammer Underworlds warband for this tutorial, you could easily apply these same techniques to other Sylvaneth miniatures, particularly Tree Revenants. While this paint job certainly won't win any awards, it's a good way of getting your miniatures painted up, and after all, it's much better to play with fully painted warband than one of coloured plastic. If you enjoyed the speed painting style of video and would like to see me give the same treatment to other Horde type armies or even warbands, do let me know in the comments below. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video. If you have any questions or would just like to chat with others who enjoy my channel, I've set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description below. And so the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching and goodbye.